Good morning and welcome. I'm Majestic Lane, Chief Equity Officer at the Allegheny Conference. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this morning's webinar. This webinar is produced by the conference and made possible with the support of our annual sponsors: Giant Eagle, PNC Financial Services Group, Highmark Allegheny Health Network, UPMC, and the UPMC Health Plan. Over the next 30 or so minutes, we'll do a deeper dive into the impressive economic impact that businesses have established in our region when they grow here. In February, the conference launched a 3-year agenda to help drive the next era of regional growth. That agenda has 4 priorities: spearheading downtown's revitalization, scaling efforts to drive inclusive growth, maximizing federal funding investments, and stepping up thought leadership on strategic economic development issues. Today's webinar is at the intersection of 2 of these: inclusive growth and thought leadership. To create a vibrant next-generation economy with opportunity for everyone, the long-range vision for our region, we need economic growth that spans demographics and geography. This growth comes from outside the region, the attention of business investment from elsewhere, but equally important, we know that growth is driven by businesses that are established here. In fact, this growth is perhaps more important to our region's future than many may realize, and you'll hear more about this in the webinar. It's important that we are informed about trends and opportunities so we can understand what's working for the region and how we can ensure that the winning trends and opportunities can continue, particularly through proactive policy and programmatic interventions, which the conference is uniquely positioned to advance. Today's webinar is grounded in some of our latest thought leadership insights, which often are presented as reports on key issues and further explored by the conference's strategy and research team. One of the members of that team before his recent retirement from full-time work at the conference was Jim Frutrell. Jim was lead on this report, and we're so excited to have him with us today in a consultant's capacity to help us walk through the research and findings. Before I turn the program over to him, I want to make everyone aware we have chosen not to use the chat and Q&A functions today, so we don't exceed the time allocated for the program. So, without further ado, please take it away, Jim.
Thanks, Majestic. It's great to be back in this capacity. And just a little background on why we're doing this. Some of you in attendance today might have attended one of our past webinars on our business investment scorecard. Since 2007, we have been producing that scorecard to annually track publicly announced business investment announcements in the region. These include business attractions, relocations, expansions, startups, and development projects. We collect these from media reports and a survey sent out to approximately 24 economic development partners in the region. And with the launch of this new Grow Our Own strategy, we wanted to really dive into the business expansion announcements we have identified over the years to really get a sense of what the impact of growing and expanding businesses in the region have on our economy. Just for purposes of definition, we define a business expansion as an existing company increasing its regional presence. And this analysis, we looked at over 3,400 business investments in the region collected between 2007 and 2023. Next slide, please. So among economists, there's this old adage that 2/3 of a region's economy exists to support the economic activity in that region. And when we pulled this information together, what I thought was really interesting was that over the 17 years we have been collecting this information, about 65% of the announcements of a company growing and investing in the region have been expansions of existing businesses. And what is even more remarkable is how little variation there has been from year to year. You can see the green line there looking at the specific percent of investment announcements that are expansions of existing companies. And it has tracked remarkably close to that 65% from year to year, barely deviating more than 5 percentage points. Next slide, please. Now, while the overall share is remarkably consistent, we do see broader variation among the key industry sectors here in the region. Both advanced manufacturing and technology and robotics, expansions of existing companies account for an above average share of announcements in those sectors. Now, in a way, this isn't surprising. Both of these sectors consistently rank first and second as the most active sectors in investment activity in the region, and they tend to be a little more established. So there's a broader pool of existing companies that would be expanding and growing. Conversely, energy-related companies, if you look at the lifetime of this initiative, back in the early part of the last decade, we had the shale gas land rush, where a lot of new companies were coming into the region from Texas, Oklahoma, Louisiana, to take advantage of the opportunities presented by shale gas. So a lot of new companies setting up. Now we're seeing a lot of new investment in companies that are looking at alternative and renewable energy along with decarbonization. So a lot of new technologies emerging that are choosing to invest in the region. Next slide, please. Looking at total job impact. So when we track these announcements, we try to identify the number of new and retained jobs that each of these announcements have. Naturally, an existing company, there might be a job retention component to that. But if were it not for this expansion, the company's continued presence in the region might be in question. So, that is part of the impact of these announcements. So in that 17-year period, expansions of existing companies have accounted for over 80% of the new and retained jobs here in the region. And over that period, that's a total of 191,500 jobs. So a lot of new and retained jobs are coming from existing companies here in the region. This, again, like the total share of expansions, has remained remarkably consistent over the years. Only a handful of years did you see any broad deviation from the 17-year average. Next slide, please. Not only do these existing companies account for a disproportionate share of total new and retained jobs, but the job impact tends to be higher from existing companies. Among expanding companies, over half of the announcements had a total job impact of more than 25 new and retained jobs, for an average of 101 jobs per announcement that provided a job impact. Conversely, new companies, less than two-thirds of them had a total impact of less than 25 jobs for an average of 43. Now, again, this is not surprising. You would assume that a new company coming into the region might start out with a smaller presence and then grow that over time, thus becoming an expansion announcement. Next slide, please. And this just shows the breakdown by category. You look at the bigger announcements, 500 or more jobs impact. 84% of the announcements are expanding companies, 81% in the 250 to 499. So again, a expanding company in this region tends to have a higher job impact. Next slide. Now, just taking the retained jobs out of the equation, it's also important to take a look at how many new jobs that these existing companies generate in the region. And over the 17-year period, 75% of the new jobs come from existing expanding companies. That is a total of 101,000 new jobs in the region over the 17-year period. Again, it tends to fluctuate over time, not too far off, though, the 17-year average. Next slide, please. Again, they do tend to have the existing companies expanding tend to have a higher job impact. 46% of the announcements accounting for 25 or more new jobs. whereas 2/3 of the attraction, relocation, startup announcements account for 25 jobs or less. The average for expanding companies is 56 new jobs. For other types of investment announcements, 37. So the gap is not as big as it is with total job impact once you strip out the retained jobs. Next slide. Now, looking at capital investment, this fluctuates a lot more than the jobs, which is not surprising because you can see in certain years, a single job announcement will have a disproportionate impact on total capital investment generated. For instance, where you have a 17-year average of 54% of all identified capital investment coming from existing companies in the region for a total of $16 billion. It does tend to deviate a lot more than jobs. So, as high as 97% one year in 2009, down to 11% in 2016, which was the year that Shell announced their big investment here in their petrochemical facility. But then again, the next year it rebounded to 79% of all announced capital investment. That was when UPMC, Allegheny Health Network, and St. Clair Health all announced major investments in their healthcare facilities in the region. So again, generates a lot of investment, but it does fluctuate from year to year. Next slide. Breaking it down by size of announcement, there's a lot less deviation among expansion announcements versus other investment announcements. Again, looking at those long-term trends about one announcement in a year might disproportionately impact things. So in among expanding companies where we were able to identify the capital investment, about 6% of announcements were for 50 million or more. And then among other types of announcements, it was about 8% for 50 million or more. So not a lot of deviation. And if you look at smaller capital investments under $5 million, you can see in both cases it accounted for about 2/3 of the announcements, about 10 to 12% for 5 to 9 million. So very similar distribution among the announcements. So I think just this analysis does show the importance of the existing companies in our region and getting them in a position where they can thrive and grow. So we wanted to look at a few of those and show you that this is far-reaching. It impacts all parts of the region, all industries. So I'll turn it over to Ellen Gauss to give you some of the examples that are out there.
Thanks, Jim. So as you said, we're going to go into a couple of the examples of the activity that we've seen over the years. Again, keep in mind that the range is generally 2007 to 2023. So you can see that all of the region's existing companies are an important factor for growth and continued prosperity. Although, as Majestic mentioned also, that there are others coming into the region, which we appreciate as well. So let's jump into it. If we can move to the next slide, please. So we're going to look at a couple different industries and then the specific companies. And one of the first is healthcare. So UPMC is the region's largest employer, and they accounted for the most expansions of any organization, with 24 announcements over that 2007 to 2023 time span, with 4,691 new jobs and nearly 4.2 billion in capital investment. IRMC, the Indiana Regional Medical Center, has 4 expansion announcements, almost 300 potential new jobs, and 74 million in capex, and also recently announced an affiliation with the Armstrong County Memorial Hospital, which was official as of July 1st. So we see that this activity happens not just in one area of the region, but far-reaching and in many different industries. If we can move to the next slide, please. And household brands have continued to grow locally, including ATI, BNY, and PPG. ATI had 2 investments generating 100 new jobs, 3,100 retained jobs, and more than 1.2 billion in capital investment, and is the largest capital investment by an existing manufacturer in the region for a new mill in Brackenridge, and specifically also the Vandergrift steel manufacturing site. BNY, which announced 7 expansions primarily between 2007 and 2015, and those announcements resulted in about 1,200 new jobs and 70 million in capital investment. Similarly, PPG had 5 announcements, resulting in almost 500 new jobs at 3 locations in Allegheny and Butler counties. So again, seeing that the activity is not concentrated in just one location, or that an employer might have locations throughout the region to expand the benefit. Next slide, please. And local manufacturers are also in growth mode. Manufacturing is consistently at the top of the list of sectors that are most active when it comes to business investment, and has seen existing companies expand throughout the region. The Washington County titanium manufacturer Perryman Company has made half a dozen expansion announcements since 2007, generating 310 new jobs and 360 million in capital investment as it expands its production and administrative capacity locally. And they are also the 5th largest titanium melter globally, and concentrated in Washington County. As I mentioned, Elliott Group in Westmoreland has made 4 investment announcements that added 285 jobs and 54 million in capital investment. And Steelite also had an expansion, or an announcement in 2024, but has had 4 announced expansions in Lawrence County and added 150 jobs and capex totaling 46.5 million. So while the range primarily for this presentation is looking at 2007 to 2023, we are continuing to monitor those expansion announcements, and so we can provide that information going forward as well. Next slide, please. And lastly, we're looking at tech and innovation-driven companies. So some of the region's newest companies have accounted for numerous announcements, and in some instances, very significant investments. Duolingo also had an announcement this year of an expansion, about 120 jobs, new employment, and over 41 million in capital investment, I believe. But as one of the region's most high-profile technology startups, they've seen constant and consistent growth, with 10 announcements since 2012, resulting in an anticipated 361 jobs. Robotics company Seegrid has announced plans to add headcount 8 separate times, resulting in almost 300 anticipated new jobs. Advanced Acoustics in Fayette County has 5 announcements, resulting in 76 new jobs and 17 million in capex. And again, although we're looking at tech and innovation companies here, again, this is far reaching from Allegheny, Fayette, and beyond. And usually these companies are not one of our largest in the region. So we're not looking at just those household names or homegrown companies in terms of like long-term impact, but still significant for their tenure in the region. Similarly, EOS Energy Enterprises, which began operations in Turtle Creek in 2020, has announced 3 expansions as it ramps up production of zinc-based energy storage solutions. Its most recent announcement in 2023 was one of the largest of the year, with 500 million investment in new production capacity, eventually resulting in about 500 new jobs. And with these highlights, we're going to transition into our backyard strategy. So if we can move to the next slide, please. And Elisa Baelstra is going to kick off this section. So I'll hand it over to her.
Thanks, Ellen. So I'm standing in today for our colleague, Rachel Lee, whose contact information is included on slide 27 of this presentation. Next slide, please. So the concept of our in-market growth is that local companies, as we've heard, represent the majority share of growth in employment and economic activity for the region. Proactive, collaborative outreach aids in us continually developing an ecosystem of growth for the region, and longer-term tracking of our business activity helps to identify both challenges and opportunities for regional economic growth, as well as informing our strategies to achieve further growth for the region. Next slide, please. The goal of our in-market growth is simple. It is to cross-functionally support the retention and expansion of at least 130 companies throughout our region by the end of 2024 across 3 primary audiences. The first, new net investment. expansion, and retention. Next slide, please. In terms of our process, thinking about strategic lead generation, what are the fastest growing companies in our region? Looking to our daily business headlines, thinking about VC-funded businesses, and of course, partnership networks. Thinking of lead qualification, contacting our businesses, arranging for in-person company visits and tours, having strategic ongoing relationship management with businesses, and providing complementary services and support. Captions came up. Next slide, please. So what can we provide to you? Market research and data such as this in order to assist in relocation decisions, real estate opportunities and the facilitation of site searches and visits, connections to business service organizations and public partners, connections to talent pipeline organizations, connections to federal funding opportunities, and assistance with navigating funding and incentives. I'm now going to turn it back over to Majestic to talk a little bit about our opportunities and challenges for growth, as well as to close us out. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Elisa. One of the things that, when we're thinking about the opportunities and challenges, we want to talk about what we've heard through going through this process, really focusing on what in-market growth looks like. And what we're hearing, and these are both opportunities and challenges depending on the situation, but one is talent. We know we have really high skilled talent in this region, and we want to keep that talent, but also we know it's so important for retention. So it's important for us to be able to keep our talent as well as attract talent to keep them here. So that's a really big focus. VC and other funding, opening new avenues for access to capital incentives. So for companies to continue to grow, it's important for them to be able to get VC and other funding to continue to expand. And we want to make sure that those resources are in the area to do that. Regional partnerships and collaborations. It's a unique asset and tool that our region has. It's the Pittsburgh way, the way that we work together all across the region. So we know that's a really important focus to keep going on so that we can keep in-market growth. Inclusive growth, both demographic and institutional. So we want to continue to see the economy grow and the in-market growth create opportunities for folks across both demographic, populations as well as geographic communities. And the local ties matter. Once you're a Pittsburgher, you're always a Pittsburgher. And we see that as leading to some really, really big wins with companies coming back into the region, given the landscape and how we're looking for this inclusive growth across all 10 regions, all 10 counties rather. So we love to hear from you. Again, Rachel, our manager of business investment, please, this is our information if you'd like to follow up and learn more about what we're doing, become part of what we're doing as we continue to look to spur this in-market growth across the region. So thank you, Jim and Ellen, for your great insights on the economic impact of the established businesses in our region who are driving the lion's share of business investment activity here in Southwestern Pennsylvania. And thanks to Lisa for your overview of the conference's Growing Our Own initiative. As we heard, this effort is intended to foster a better understanding of why businesses are growing here and to learn what they need more of. Armed with those kind of insights, the conference can help to create the conditions that encourage and support that growth all across our region. And we thank once again our annual sponsors for their support, which is helping to make that happen. Giant Eagle, PNC Services Financial Group, Highmark Allegheny Health Network, and UPMC and the UPMC Health Plan. And finally, thanks to you all today for joining us. We'll be emailing each of you a copy of the report. Please feel free to share it with local businesses and your networks, and encourage them to reach out to Rachel and the Growing Our Own team and get engaged. Together, we look to create a vibrant economy with economic opportunity for all businesses and individuals who make our region their home. Have an amazing remainder of your day.